Welcome to the Truman Charities podcast. I'm Jamie Truman, your host. Today, I spoke with Ashish Alfred, known as Chef Al, from our Vanishing Fathers series. You may have seen him on the Today Shows, Daily Mail, Good Morning America, or ate at one of his many famous restaurants, Duck Duck Goose, Ducking Burger, or Anchor Tavern, just to name a few. Chef Al has been a good friend of my husband's for years and has been a wonderful sponsor to Truman Charities. But it wasn't until recently that I had a chance to sit down with Chef Al and talk about how he was able to go from being addicted to drugs and alcohol to becoming a celebrity chef. We speak about his upbringing, his addiction, and how he's had the strength to stay sober. It really was an honor to sit down and speak with Chef Al. And I know that this conversation will help so many people that may be struggling. This is Chef Al's story. Hi, Al. How are you?
I'm great. Thank you. How are you?
Good. I'm so glad that you decided to come on. I've known you for years, but I don't really know a lot about your story. So I'm very excited to hear about that. So let's start out from the beginning, like where and when were you born and what was your family dynamic as a young child?
Sure. I was born in Silver Spring in 1986, just next to where a lot of people are familiar with the Golden Bull. I was born just near there off of Metzerot Road. We lived in Montgomery County most of my life. Family dynamic. Mom was a big time worker. She worked during the day, and then in the evening she ran a little bit of she would help people with their immigration paperwork from home, just help them fill out the papers, kind of told them, the right way to go about things. And my dad was, he was around a lot when I was young because my mom worked during the day. So when I was little, my dad was around a lot. But as I got older, his presence in the house kind of dwindled. And I think that as he struggled more and more with his own issues, obviously his presence in the house became less and less. My oldest brother was not around much growing up. My middle brother, who passed away, George, in 2015, he was kind of, when my parents weren't around, he was sort of my primary caregiver. He took a lot of care of me growing up. He fed me, clothed me, you name it, he did. He was 10 years older than me, so he was as much a parent to me as anybody else. I think I said already, mom wasn't around much. Even into my teenage years, mom was not around a lot. She had to work. She was building something, and it worked out well because she's built a little empire for herself.
So what was it like at school for you?
I remember the younger years of my life, school being kind of a pleasant thing for me up until maybe like the second or third grade. Um, I remember, not really having an issue at school, not having issues at school. And I think that as I got into like the third or fourth grade, that's when issues with my performance began to arise. There were progress reports being sent home every week. There were issues with discipline. There were just a lot of questions as to, what happened with this kid. He seemed to be doing fine, and all of a sudden he's not. And it kind of continued. My entire academic career was challenging, more for my mother than for me.
Why do you think there was that change from you were performing well in school until like second and third grade, and then you started to have issues?
I think I just became more perceptive to what was going on in the house around me. I think when I was younger, I was very, very naive to the tension and the stress and at times the violence. And as I got older and became less naive to those things, I think they just started to affect me differently. And I think that at home, where I very much had to operate in sort of like a straitjacket, I think school became a place where I could express myself and try to find out who I was and try to gain some confidence and instead of going to school for what school is for, if that makes sense.
How did that feel as your dad started to have less and less of a presence within the house?
I remember him popping up sometimes. Sometimes it would be late at night, and then he would be around for a while, and then there would, you know, be some sort of crescendo that ended with the police or him just leaving or whatever. Um, I remember not seeing him for long periods of time. I remember sometimes being dropped off to see him at some apartment that he may be staying at for some short period of time. I I I know from what my mother has told me that at a young age, I longed for him very desperately. As much as I was in many ways afraid of him, I did, I think, long for the love that I knew he was capable of giving me, and that was very painful for me as a child.
And so is that where you think your brother George stepped in and did a lot of those things that, say, you would have done with your father?
I think he tried. I think George tried to the best of his ability, but
Right.
um,
He's still
you
a
know,
kid. Yeah.
yeah, he was still a kid too, and also, he had grown up. He's from my mother's first marriage, so he had seen a lot of trauma, or he had experienced a lot of trauma and seen a lot of violence before my father even came into the picture. And then when my father came into the picture, it was just even more so. So I think that George operated to the highest level of his consciousness, and he did the best he could for me. But um, I, you know, I don't know that he really filled that void.
Mm-hmm.
And also, it's important to remember he's 10 years older than me. So, when I'm, 9 years old, he's going off to college. And he
Right.
did, he went out to California. So, I became the only man in my mother's life, for better or for worse. And, we kind of, a lot of people wonder how my mother and I got so close. And people are easy to think that, oh, it's just, easy to jump to the conclusion like, oh, he's just spoiled by his doting mother. And, that might be a little bit true, but most of it is, we were all each other had for a very long time.
Mm-hmm. So what was that like when you had to change that dynamic in the house? So your brother, both your brothers are now out of the house and you're 9 and it's just you and your mom.
It was tough. It was tough,
It's
having a front row seat to my mother trying to process all the stress and emotion of, one, trying to build a business, two, doing it alone, three, trying to raise a young man, uh, and four, dealing with my father, who at the time was, in the throes and heights of his addiction.
Mhm, mhm.
It's people from time to time will ask me, I want to, get a divorce, or I want to get a separation, or whatever have you. And they'll say, but I don't want to, hurt the kids. And I'm no therapist. But for whatever reason, people feel safe asking me these things. And I feel blessed that they do. And I always say, what your kid wants more than anything else is happy parents.
Right.
And I remember as a child, not that I didn't feel that my mother loved me. I always knew that she loved me very much. But I remember imbibing a lot of her anxiety, a lot of her depression, a lot of her stress. I remember experiencing a lot of her pain, which, she was an adult. She was equipped to process those emotions. I, as a child, was not, which, of course, this is many years of therapy and whatever later. I obviously was not always wise enough to know these things about myself, but I do now.
Right. They do say that kids absorb feelings and emotions and events so much differently, obviously, than adults do
Yep.
because your brain's still forming. So, can you tell me a little bit about your adolescence?
Um, yeah, I was a pretty lonely kid. I struggled for a while to fit in. I eventually became the young man that would kind of do anything to get friends, that would kind of fuck off his academic career, act like a moron, get into slightly violent altercations, drink to excess, whatever I could do that I felt like would weave me into the fabric of whatever group it was that I wanted to gain acceptance from. Because who knows if it was because I didn't feel acceptance at home or if I just wanted attention. Who knows? Any number of those things. But as I've grown and become more observant and become more self-aware and aware of the world around me, I've found more and more that people that experience the kind of adolescence that I have, not all the time, but a lot of the times, they come from a place where there was not a lot of there was not a strong familial support behind them. And though my mother was very supportive and loved me very much and wanted to see me do well and went to great lengths, there's you cannot make up for lost time. And at 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, those are golden years for a child to develop his confidence, his sense of self, or her confidence or her sense of self, and learn from the grown-ups around them how they want to show up in the world and how they want to set boundaries about what they will and won't do, and kind of what their trajectory looks like. And I missed out on that, for better or for worse.
And so when did you start drinking and hanging out with these different type of individuals that are doing drugs?
Yeah, sure. It was in my late teens. I was probably, I always had a healthy respect for alcohol because I saw what it had done to my father, and I kind of stayed away from it until 16 or 17. And 17, 18 is when I really started drinking heavily. It was what everybody was doing. Binge drinking was a big deal. We were shotgunning beers. You don't see it as becoming a problem. And again, this is hindsight being 2020. I think that whether I knew it at the time or not, I think I was using alcohol at that time as a way to not just numb myself, but also to feel like, king of the world. Like I can have a conversation with anybody. I belong in any group. Alcohol is my ticket in, because I alone on my own, I'm not the ticket. Alcohol buys me entrance. It's my cover charge.
Mm-hmm. And then when did you start experimenting with other drugs?
In my early 20s.
Okay. And so during this whole time as you were growing up, so now you're, a famous chef, you have all of these restaurants. Where did you get the love for the kitchen, for being a chef? Was this all throughout your childhood, or is this something that was later on?
No, I don't think that it was necessarily a love for cooking that got me started. I think it was a love for hospitality. I had grown up, my mom opened her first assisted living home in 1991 in Olney. My father had a background in hotels, and when he was around, he did, I mean, he was with her when they opened that first business, and they both worked very hard together. But seeing that level of care and pride and taking care of somebody else, I think that was one lesson that collectively, whether they meant to teach it to me or not, they did teach to me, in that they took great pride in caring for others, and also growing up in an Asian, or specifically Indian household. I had always seen growing up the amount of pride and effort that was taken in caring for others, even if it was somebody just coming over for a cup of tea. I mean, it's a whole ritual. So I think that stuck with me, and I don't know if it was because it was the one way I knew that I could really impress my dad. Like I would watch them make drinks, for example, and the glasses were laid on the tray in just a certain way, and there was a napkin put down and the glass was put down. And for me, I whenever I had the opportunity, I would take great pride in doing those things. Almost like when dad lets you use the grill for the first time. Go ahead, flip that steak. But for me, extrapolate that over a career. My passion was for hospitality. So I got into restaurants when I was 15, 16 years old as a host, and then worked my way through sort of the front end as bar back, door guy, bartender, and unfortunately or fortunately, I found it a very easy place for my addictions to exist. So when it all kind of came to a head, I realized that I was not going to do well in college, and my mom was sick of paying for it. So I said, well, I'm Indian and I need a piece of paper stating that I know how to do something. So I was like, well, let me try culinary school. So I go to them with this harebrained idea for culinary school. And, my mom, while she's signing the paperwork, she's calling and she's like, okay, so how much does it cost me when he leaves? Like when he does it for 2 weeks and he leaves, how much does it cost me? She's helping me get the apartment, and she's asking them the same thing. Like, okay, how much if he breaks his lease in a month? Because I got to come get him because he screwed all this up. Mm-hmm. So nobody had any idea that I would go there and succeed. And I think that when I got there, it was not that I had a great passion for cooking. It was that I just had a great passion for hospitality, and for just I enjoyed the structure, and I enjoyed being told what to do and how to do things. I did well because I took direction very well. I did well because the heat, the pressure, the violence of the kitchen was nothing new to me. I'd watched my mother build a business. I'd grown up around my brother, who I wouldn't say was volatile, but my brother was, my brother didn't fuck around. He was 10 years older than me, and he held me to a very high standard, whether it was with my chores or with school or with whatever. So it was nothing to have somebody barking at me. My father, if you didn't move fast enough, he fucking moved you. Mm-hmm. So, it was nothing to me to have somebody breathing down my neck, screaming at me. I was like, this is a cakewalk. So I didn't go into it thinking that I was going to be the, next Iron Chef. I just went in thinking, okay, I just got to dice these shallots faster and cleaner than the guy next to me, and I can exist in peace here.
Mm-hmm. And then so what happened when you graduated from culinary school?
I stayed in New York. I held a couple jobs for as long as I could hold them. And, I would inevitably, I'd get really banged up, and I'd miss work for a couple of days, and then I'd get fired, and then I'd find another job. And it's just it's a very common pattern in the hospitality industry. Somebody will work somewhere for a little while until their demons really show up, and then they'll go find another job, and then they'll do the same thing there. And fortunately, there's enough good restaurants around where you can keep existing that way. But came to a point where I had burned enough bridges, and I was just really physically unhealthy. And my mom was like, all right, time for you to come back down. So I came back down and I opened the catastrophe that was my first restaurant. I think you were there. You had front row seats. And I thought that, having this restaurant would help, straighten me up. My mom thought it would help straighten me up, but, it did just the opposite until you address the things that ail you. You will continue to fail because of them. And it's proved true in my life over and over and over again.
So tell me a little bit about the opening and closing of that restaurant.
So we opened the restaurant having no idea how much money it would actually take to get it open. It was just a simple that, having no real idea of the restaurant business. I'd worked as a cook all over New York. What did I know about opening a restaurant or training a staff or running a P&L? I knew nothing. I knew that I had a little bit of my mother's money, a handful of beer, and a pocket full of Coke. I figured I would figure it out. Mm-hmm. And I opened it thinking that, I'm definitely the best cook in Bethesda, which at the time I probably was. And, but it didn't matter because I had no idea how to run a business. So opened it super undercapitalized, no real plan in place. And inevitably it failed. We tried to make it work, and it wouldn't work. It wouldn't work because I wasn't working the way I was supposed to work. And eventually my mother got wise, and she realized that I wasn't going to fix myself, and there had to be some sort of a catalyst. So my mom came to me and she said, listen, I love you very much, and I'm very sorry for what you've been through in your life and how your life has transpired, but none of that is my fault. And you have to at some point take ownership of it all, and I have to I have to push you aside until you decide to do something for yourself. So one day on the side of Cordell Avenue, she let me out of her car and said, fix yourself, or I don't want to see you anymore. So I did. I went to rehab with no intention of it working. And I think it worked for all the same reasons that culinary school worked. You know, I went somewhere and somebody told me what to do, and I didn't have to be responsible, and I didn't have to think for myself, at least for a little while. And I came home in a clearer headspace and better equipped. And you know, and we're in a place where I had the confidence of those around me. And I opened my first real restaurant, which was Duck Duck Goose. And I made some promises there to myself and to God and my family that you know, fortunately, I have yet to break.
Do you find it difficult to be working in the restaurant industry as someone that's now sober?
Yes and no. Yes, because it is difficult when you see people who are living that active addiction. Um, when you see people who are living that active addiction and you see it breaking them down and you see the potential in them and you see how well they could do, and you just see them kind of on that mouse wheel of insanity, that makes it very hard. And it makes it also very hard sometimes to find patience for these people, because you're like, man, there's help if you just get it. There's help. Mm-hmm. So that part makes it hard. But as far as, like, you know, wanting to get off of work and have a drink because everybody else is, no. You know, I've definitely had my slips and trips along the way. You know, my journey has not been perfect. But anytime that I've had a misstep, it has not been because you know, I felt pressured by the environment around me. I think that if you want to be sober, you're going to stay sober no matter what. And I think that, you know, for me, the decision was very simple, very early on, where I told, you know, there was that conversation had where it was like, okay, do you need to find a new line of work? Do you need to find something else to do? And I'm like, fuck, this is the only thing I've ever been good at. Like, what am I gonna? How many times am I gonna reinvent myself? I'm now, at the time, 27 years old. I was like, no. For me, my sobriety's got to mean that I can go wherever I want to go, do whatever I want to do. I just can't I just can't use.
Mm-hmm. And do you think that if your mom didn't pull you over on Cordell that one day, that you wouldn't have put yourself in rehab? Do you think that she was the reason why you finally decided to go?
I think it was definitely the catalyst. I think that, you know, we say jails, institutions, and death. I'd already been to jail. I tried rehab a couple times before it stuck. I think that it was definitely the catalyst. I think that I would have ended up getting some help at some point, or dead. Mm-hmm. I mean, to be clear, after we had that conversation, I had almost died once already, twice already. So I think that, yeah, I would have figured it out, or it would have figured me out one way or the other.
Mm-hmm. So let's talk a little bit about the opening of Duck Duck Goose. So It was vastly different than, say, the first restaurant that you had open, meaning the feel, style, type of food, everything.
I think that when I opened my first restaurant, which was 4935, I think there was just a lack of direction. Nobody really knew what the concept was except for me. I mean, I think that if anything, right? If it's a book, if it's a TV show, if it's a restaurant, if it's a business, you have to be able to give the elevator pitch in 10 seconds. And I could never do that with my first restaurant. There was a huge lack of clarity. And then when it came time for me to open this restaurant, I was like, well, what do I know how to do? What have I done? What have I seen done 100 times that I know how to do? And it was a French bistro. You know, I had lived in New York, and I had worked in some of these small brasserie style restaurants, and I knew what worked, and I knew what kept those seats full, and I knew how simple it was, and how relatable it was. So that was the focus. The focus was no longer Ashish Alfred trying to prove that he was something that he wasn't. The focus was just it was the concept. Mm-hmm. Does that make sense? It wasn't rooted in my ego. It was rooted in what was the most scalable idea for both client and employee. And that's where Duck Duck Goose came from. And I think the proof is in the pudding. There's 3 now. It's been 7 years.
Yes, they're doing very well. So tell me about the openings of your other restaurants.
So we've had some wins, we've had some losses. You know, we opened up after I opened Duck Duck Goose and found some success there. I waited a couple years, and then I transitioned 4935, because I had the money to do it finally, into George's Chop House, and that had started to do really well in 2019 into 2020. And then unfortunately we got smacked with the pandemic, and we had 3 landlords, 2 of which were willing to negotiate our rent and work with us to try to figure out something that worked through the pandemic. And the landlord at George's Chop House, aka 4935, excuse me, was not happy to work with us, and he felt that he was entitled to the entire rent. We felt differently, and you know, sometimes when it doesn't go well at the playground, the best thing to do is you take your ball and go home. But you know, closing one door allowed a few more to open. So we closed George's Chop House, and in turn we opened Duck Duck Goose in DuPont Circle. That was the 3rd Duck Duck Goose. We had one in Baltimore, which we opened in 2018. We opened No Way Rosé. And then very shortly thereafter, we signed the lease for Osteria, Pirata, and the Anchor Bar. No Way Rosé ended up being another failure. We had to walk away from that restaurant. It was just a bad part of town. Wasn't working for our employees, wasn't working for our clientele. So we closed that one. But, you know, there again, you know, with any of these businesses, it wasn't my ego tied up in it at all. You know, when it wasn't working and the writing was on the wall to close No Way Rosé, it was a pretty easy decision. It wasn't working.
And so what restaurants do you now have open?
So we have the 3 Duck Duck Geese. We've got Baltimore, Bethesda, DuPont. We've got the Anchor Bar, which is also in Baltimore. We've got Osteria Pirata, which is also in Baltimore. And then we have a ghost kitchen concept, which we're looking to maybe turn into a brick and mortar, which is called Good Ducking Burger, which is like a fusion of the American Smash Burger and some pretty fun Indian flavors, which is starting to go really well. So we'll see how it plays out.
So after all these successes, what is your relationship now like with your parents?
You know, my relationship with my father is totally different now. My father ended up getting sober in 2014 or 15, I think. You know, I say this every time I speak about my father publicly or otherwise. My father was who he was, and now he is who he is. You know, so you know, everybody's cancel culture is a thing, right? And I haven't canceled my father yet, so I'm not ready for anybody else to. You know, I don't see him much anymore. He lives overseas. But you know, my father's sobriety, I think, gave me the gift of sobriety. And if there's one person on this world that has been my biggest cheerleader, it has been my father, and I will never not thank him for that. My mother, we have an amazing relationship. You know, I'm able to help her out a little bit with her business from time to time, and she's also one of my biggest fans. On the days that I don't want to do it anymore, you know, we open 3 restaurants in 1 calendar year, pretty much, and that takes its toll financially, physically, emotionally, and you know, she is a ball buster, and you know, she's 5'3" of get up, go do it again, get up, go do it again, get up, go do it again. Nobody told you it'd be easy. Get up and do it again. So we have a beautiful relationship now. I know I can count on her, and she's very certain that she can count on me.
Now, is family something that you see in your future?
Yeah, you know, I hope so. I mean, this business takes a lot of my time, it takes a lot of my effort, and sometimes there's just not a lot left. Even if I can close the briefcase, proverbially, even if I can close the briefcase at the end of the day, sometimes there's just not a lot of me left to give someone. I think that the fear of that makes it difficult to want to commit to something. And for me, I have certain ideals and aspirations of how I would want my family unit to operate. And for all those things to, I mean, nothing ever goes to plan, right? I mean, you write a plan and God says, yeah, go fuck yourself. Yeah, I'd like there to be. I think that, what use is everything that I've been through if I can't share my experiences, strength, and love with somebody else?
Now, there's going to be a lot of younger men and women that are listening to this podcast and listening about your story. If there's anybody that, say, was in the same type of circumstance that you were in as a young adult, what would your advice be to them?
My advice to them is if you think you have a problem, you probably have a problem. I think a lot of people skirt the issue where they're like, well, I'm not as bad as this person, or I'm not sitting on the side of the road with a paper bag, and I'm not, my rent is paid and I have a job. But if you think you have a problem, you probably have a problem. That, and this is not like a one size fits all thing. I think sobriety, a lot of times people get scared off because they think that it's an all or nothing sort of thing, and really it's just a just for today thing. There's no hard and fast rules to any of this. Nothing is as hard as you think it is. Nothing is as hard as you think it is, and nothing's really ever as bad as you think it is either. There's help if you want it.
And then before I let you go, how do you envision your future to look like?
I think the restaurants for me, if things go the way I want them to go, the restaurants for me have become more of a pedestal for me to do something on my own than they are a place for me, or how do I explain this? The restaurants have helped me build a platform for myself. Mm-hmm. So I think that now that things are starting to come together, I've got a book in the works. I've got a couple different TV opportunities in the works that it'll be interesting to see how all of that comes together. And depending on how that comes together, it'll kind of determine the future of the restaurants. I think that to toot my own horn a little bit, I think I have single-handedly built a brand that is scalable and that is buildable for the right people. And when the time comes, if it's time for me to keep it, then I'll keep it. And if it's not time for me to keep it, then I won't keep it. Fortunately, I'm not like tied down one way or the other.
Well, Al, I want to thank you so much for coming on and talking with me and talking about your story and how you've become such a, I would say now you're kind of a celebrity chef. But I love to say, I'm like, well, I knew him before everyone else did. I knew him before the Today Show. I knew him before we see him on all of these talk shows. I really do appreciate everything that you do for us and everything that you do for so many people. And I think that you're going to help a lot of people by telling your story. So thank you.
Thank you. Have a good day.
Yes, you too.
Bye.
Bye. If you enjoyed this episode in our Vanishing Fathers series, please make sure to rate and review this podcast. The reviews really do count. If you'd like to hear more about the statistics and further understand the impact on fathers in society, please purchase our book, Vanishing Fathers, A Ripple Effect on Tomorrow's Generation. All proceeds from the book will directly go to charities that are helping at-risk youths. And if you'd like to follow us online, you could go to our website, trumancharities.com, Facebook @TrumanCharities, Instagram, Jamie_TrumanCharities, and you can follow me on LinkedIn @Jamie Truman. Thank you so much for listening to our Vanishing Fathers series, and please make sure to subscribe so you don't miss any further episodes. If you enjoyed this episode in our Vanishing Fathers series, please make sure to rate and review this podcast. The reviews really do count. If you'd like to hear more about the statistics and further understand the impact on fathers in society, please purchase our book, Vanishing Fathers, A Ripple Effect on Tomorrow's Generation. All proceeds from the book will directly go to charities that are helping at-risk youths. And if you'd like to follow us online, go to our website, trumancharities.com, Facebook @TrumanCharities, Instagram, Jamie_TrumanCharities, And you can follow me on LinkedIn at Jamie Truman. Thank you so much for listening to our Vanishing Father series, and please make sure to subscribe so you don't miss any further episodes.